have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 7th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Paramount received signed equity commitments of close to $24 billion from three sovereign wealth funds led by Saudi Arabia to help back its takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. J.P. Morgan Chase Chief Executive Jamie Dimon, in his annual letter to shareholders, warned that the war in Iran could push up inflation and depress financial markets further if interest rates start to rise. Major U.S. stock indexes rallied, with the S&P 500 and Dow both rising 0.4%, and the Nasdaq gaining 0.5%, as investors took heart from the latest jobs report. Neurocrine agreed to buy Soleno for $2.9 billion, giving it the first approved treatment for a rare genetic disorder that causes relentless, life-threatening hunger. Amazon.com and the U.S. Postal Service have reached a new package handling agreement, subject to approval by federal government regulators. An executive overseeing a UK music festival defended booking Kanye West as the event's headliner, following criticism from political leaders and the withdrawal of prominent sponsors. Anthropic plans to invest $200 million in a new venture with private equity firms that aims to sell AI tools to their portfolio companies. SpaceX delayed the next test flight of its massive Starship rocket, pushing back the mission by at least another month as the company prepares for its public debut. Oracle hired Hilary Maxson away from Schneider Electric to be the software company's chief financial officer, effective immediately. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Negotiators are pessimistic Iran will bend to meet Trump's demand to reopen the Strait of Hormuz before his Tuesday night deadline, paving the way for the U.S. to target Iranian bridges and electric plants in a fresh escalation of the war. Economists say that the oil shock rippling through Asia is a sign of things to come for countries in Europe and Africa that also rely on petroleum imports from the Middle East. The Trump administration will raise payments to Medicare insurers by 2.48% next year, a dramatic increase from a preliminary proposal that would have held the line on payments. California's Attorney General sent a warning to private equity firms as the state starts to implement a law banning corporate influence in medicine. OpenAI released policy proposals for a world with artificial superintelligence as Congress prepares to debate AI legislation. A Goldman Sachs report analyzing past technology waves warns that AI displaced workers face potentially severe economic pain. Trump accounts, a saving tool for children created under last year's tax law, will initially be managed by BNY and Robinhood Markets, the Treasury Department said. The Supreme Court paved the way for a lower court to erase the criminal conviction of Trump advisor Steve Bannon, who served 4 months in prison for defying a House panel subpoena. South Korea's spy agency said the teenage daughter of North Korea leader Kim Jong-un could be seen as his political heir, its strongest view yet on the succession. The picture on today's front page is of the 4 astronauts inside their capsule studying various documents. And that caption reads, "Miles to go." The astronauts on NASA's Artemis II lunar mission steered their Orion craft into the record books on Monday, reaching a distance of 252,756 miles from Earth, before swinging around the moon's far side and beginning the return home. And that headline reads, "Astronauts Ride into the Record Books." The article, "Astronauts Set Space Travel Record. Artemis II Breaks Apollo 13 Milestone for Distance, Transits Behind the Moon," by Micah Maidenberg. The Artemis astronauts have gone the distance, the longest in human history, in fact. Just before 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time Monday, the astronauts on NASA's Artemis II lunar mission rode their Orion craft into the record books, flying more than 248,655 miles from Earth. That surpassed the milestone NASA's Apollo 13 mission set in 1970. Quote, "We, most importantly, choose this moment to challenge this generation and the next to make sure this record is not long-lived," said Jeremy Hansen, the Artemis astronaut representing the Canadian Space Agency. Monday was one of the most consequential periods for the Artemis II mission, which has proceeded with only minor glitches so far. Earlier in the day, Orion entered a point where the gravity of the moon was exerting a stronger pull on the spacecraft than the Earth, setting up the crew, Reed Wiseman, Christina Cook, Victor Glover, and Hansen, for the kind of lunar flyby the National Aeronautics and Space Administration hasn't attempted in decades. On Monday evening, Orion transited behind the moon, where the crew lost communications with Earth for 40 minutes or so. During that time, the ship reached its maximum distance from the planet during the mission, 252,756 miles away. "It is so great to hear from Earth again," Cook said to Mission Control at the Johnson Space Center around 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, confirming communications were back. Besides setting a distance record for human space flight, the Artemis crew has been gearing up to make the most of the time they spend swooping around the moon. That means meticulously photographing and observing the lunar surface. We're looking for the crew to take time during their flyby, let their eyes adjust to what they're seeing, and call out any of those subtle color nuances, especially on the parts of the far side that never have been seen before by human eyes, Kelsey Young, the top lunar science official for the mission, said on Saturday. Mission controllers sent the crew a list of 30 targets to track on the lunar surface. Among them is a 3.8 billion year old crater called Oriental Basin. Young said the crew trained extensively for the flyby, including a trip to Iceland to work on describing geologic features. The crew also proposed naming 2 craters on the moon as they approached it, saying they would like to call one Integrity after the name of their ship. They suggested calling another one Carroll, Carroll, after Wiseman's late wife. There are islands of terrain out there that are completely surrounded by darkness, which indicates some real variation in terrain, Glover said on NASA's mission live stream, as the crew prepared to circle around the far side of the moon. Glover, a naval aviator who joined NASA's astronaut corps in 2013, at one point observed a double crater on the lunar surface that he said resembled a snowman. A few issues cropped up on Orion over the past couple of days, including an unusual smell in the spacecraft. It wasn't clear what was causing the odor, NASA officials said, which may have emerged from a mechanical system or materials like tapes on board. Other articles from the front page follow. Hope fades for Iran deal ahead of deadline. Trump vowed to bomb bridges, power plants if Hormuz stays shut. By Robbie Gramer, Summer Saeed, and Alexander Ward. Washington. Negotiators are pessimistic Iran will bend to meet President Trump's demand to reopen the Strait of Hormuz before his Tuesday night deadline, paving the way for the U.S. to target Iranian bridges and electric plants in a fresh escalation of the war. Trump has set a deadline of 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Tuesday for Iran to reach a deal or face attacks on its power plants and bridges. Quote, the entire country can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night, Trump said during a news conference on Monday. Now, as everyone from Vice President J.D. Vance to top Middle Eastern spy chiefs push for a last-ditch ceasefire, Iranian officials are telling mediators they expect a major strike on Tuesday, U.S. officials and mediators said. Trump could also extend the Tuesday deadline, something he has also done multiple times already. Some U.S. officials said there is too large a gap between Washington's and Tehran's positions to narrow before Trump's deadline. Meanwhile, Iranian officials have told mediators that the U.S. will continue to attack targets in the war-torn country, while further expecting Israel to keep conducting airstrikes to take out senior Iranian officials, even if negotiations with the U.S. move forward, Arab officials familiar with the matter said. Iran is negotiating, we think, in good faith, Trump said at the White House on Monday, but if not, the U.S. will be blowing everything up. Some U.S. officials said Trump has privately been less hopeful that Iran will make a deal, expecting to issue final orders for strikes on Tuesday evening, though they note the president's assessment could change based on how overnight talks play out. Only President Trump knows what he will do, and the entire world will find out tomorrow night if bridges and electric plants are annihilated, said White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly. Law of war experts and human rights groups say striking civilian infrastructure with no clear military need amounts to war crimes. But Trump repeatedly said the Iranian people support those actions, saying they would be upset if U.S. strikes stopped. They want to hear bombs because they want to be free, he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Saudi Arabia's grand vision slams into a harsh reality. Budget shortfalls, impractical designs, and now war in Iran set back ambitions. By Stephen Kalin, Elliot Brown, and Summer Saeed. Vast development sites around Riyadh trumpet images of a shiny new future for Saudi Arabia, part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's grandiose Vision 2030 agenda to turn the petrostate into an international hub of trade, technology, and culture. Appeals for investment are sprinkled on ubiquitous construction fencing, along with English language catchphrases such as redefining livability and an extraordinary new normal. Mohammed's vision extended to a pledge to invest up to $1 trillion in the U.S. during a landmark visit to the White House in November, earning him praise from President Trump. The warm embrace was a signal that the de facto Saudi leader, once shunned in the West, was fully rehabilitated on the world stage. Yet those extraordinary plans are slamming into reality. Over the past year, the world's largest oil exporter began pulling back on many of its promised projects and investments, met with budget shortfalls and unrealistic designs. And now the U.S. and Israeli war with Iran has plunged Mohammed's sweeping vision deeper into jeopardy. Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz has limited Saudi oil exports to about half their normal capacity. The kingdom has shut down most of its offshore fields and this week stopped operating one of the world's largest petrochemical plants. Hundreds of Iranian drones and ballistic missiles launched at Saudi Arabia have hurt its image as a safe place for investors and visitors, even though most were intercepted. Major events have been canceled, including an F1 race, a capital markets forum, and a flag football event featuring Tom Brady. On Thursday, major U.S. companies operating in Riyadh told their staff to work from home for the next few days, and some large office towers and business parks, including the King Abdullah Financial District, temporarily closed following Iranian threats against U.S. firms. The war has already cost Saudi Arabia more than $10 billion in lost revenues and expenses, people familiar with the matter say. The Saudi government didn't respond to requests for comment. Workers opt to retire amid shift to AI. Your battery doesn't hold a charge as long as it used to, a new retiree said. By Lauren Weber and Ray A. Smith. Luc Michel has already lived through 2 technology overhauls in his career. First, desktop publishing in the 1980s, and online publishing later on. But AI, he's had enough. So when his employer, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, made an early retirement offer to some staff last year, the 68-year-old content strategist decided to speed up his exit. Before, he'd expected to work a couple of more years. The time and energy you have to devote to learning a whole new vocabulary and a whole new skill set, it wasn't worth it, he said. It isn't that he's shunning AI. He's learning Spanish with the help of Anthropic's Claude. But at this point, he's less than eager to endure all the ways that technology promises to upend work. I just want to use it for my own purposes and not someone else's, he said. After rising for decades and then hovering around 40% in the 2010s, the share of Americans over age 55 and in the workforce has slipped to 37.2%, the lowest level in more than 20 years. The financial cushion of rising home equity and stock market returns is driving some of the decline, economists and retirement advisors said. But for some older professionals, money is only part of the equation. They said they don't want to spend the last years of their career going through the tumult of AI adoption, which has brought new tools, new expectations, and a lot of uncertainty. Many people retire when key elements of their work lives are disrupted at once, said Robert Lara, co-founder of the Retirement Coaches Association and an expert on the psychology of retirement. Maybe their autonomy is being challenged or changed, their friends are leaving the workplace, or they disagree with the company's direction, he said. When 2 or 3 of these things show up, that's when people start to opt out. AI is a big one, he said. It disrupts their autonomy, their professionalism. Medicare insurers to get major bump by Anna Wild Matthews. The Trump administration will raise payments to Medicare insurers by 2.48% next year, a dramatic increase, after a preliminary proposal holding the line on payments drew fierce criticism from the industry and torpedoed shares of the largest companies. The final 2027 rates for Medicare Advantage, the private insured version of the federal program for seniors and the disabled, came in above some analyst expectations. Several had suggested a rate increase would likely be finalized at around 1% or slightly higher, with a bull case closer to 2% to 3%. The final increase represents about $13 billion in additional payments to the insurers. The announcement marks a stunning turnaround for an industry that has been battered by a series of financial setbacks across multiple lines of business, particularly in the Medicare plans that had long been a major engine of growth. The January proposal would have held rates roughly flat, and the news wiped out about $100 billion in market capitalization for the largest insurers. Investors reacted quickly to what many saw as a signal of future support for Medicare Advantage from the Trump administration. Shares of United Health rose nearly 9% in after-hours trading, while Elevance Health was up 8%, Humana increased 12%, and CVS Health, which owns Aetna, was up 8%. Chris Klump, The Medicare program director said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is trying to balance the interest of enrollees and taxpayers. We have to be wise stewards of the tax dollars, said Klump, who is now a top official at the Department of Health and Human Services. But we need to make sure that plans aren't pulling out of markets, that they're not cutting benefits that beneficiaries are relying on. Robinhood BNY to run Trump accounts. Wall Street firms have been vying to score a coveted role in the program. By Alicia Ebling and Jack Pitcher. Bank of New York Mellon and Robinhood are the early winners in Wall Street's race to play a role in setting up and running Trump's accounts, a new savings tool for children created under last year's tax law. The Treasury Department announced Monday that it has designated BNY as a financial agent to manage the initial accounts. The bank is working with Robinhood Markets to tap its design and technology expertise to develop a Trump Accounts app and provide customer service, the department said. Our task is clear: to provide the next generation of Americans with a world-class, intuitive platform to jumpstart their financial future, said Vad Tanev, Robinhood's chairman and chief executive. The app will be a custom white label product for Treasury, meaning it won't have BNY or Robinhood branding. Financial terms of the contract weren't disclosed. Wall Street firms have been angling for a role in the program since it was announced, in part because the accounts are a potential gateway for acquiring customers for life. Many of the biggest banks, brokerages, and asset managers had planned to pitch their services to the Treasury Department, the Wall Street Journal has reported. BNY's relationship with Treasury dates to the 18th century when it provided the federal government with its first loan. BNY Chief Executive Robin Vince said Trump accounts will give more children a foundation for long-term financial security. Tens of millions of children are eligible for the accounts, which can grow tax-deferred for decades. All children with a Social Security number can have an account, but only those born between 2025 and 2028 who are U.S. citizens and have a Social Security number are eligible for $1,000 in seed money from the federal government. So far, more than 4 million children have been signed up, with about a quarter of them eligible for the $1,000 funding, according to Treasury. Treasury said it would retain control over the app and operations for these initial accounts, but within a year, people will be able to roll over the accounts to other financial institutions. That could help those who want to consolidate their accounts at one brokerage and open the door to different investment lineups. Parents can register children now and elect the $1,000 seed money at trumpaccounts.gov or by filing Form 4547 when they file their taxes. These are custodial accounts, so the custodian, typically a parent, would make decisions around rollovers and investments on behalf of the child. The accounts have to be invested in index funds of mostly U.S. stocks until age 18, when children generally can first take distributions. Funds must have an expense ratio of 0.1% or less. In the year the child turns 18, the account starts following tax rules for individual retirement accounts. Michigan wins NCAA tournament. The Wolverines took home their first men's basketball championship since 1989 with a 69-63 victory over UConn. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. There's an article asking the public, what movies do you think have had the biggest impact in America since the median was invented? The titles our readers suggested, gathered here chronologically, have both personal and universal resonance. 1939, The Wizard of Oz. 1942, Casablanca. 1946, It's a Wonderful Life. 1952, Singing in the Rain. 1959, Ben-Hur. 1960, The Apartment. 1962, Lawrence of Arabia. 1965, The Sound of Music. 1972, The Godfather. 1973, American Graffiti. 1975, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. 1977, Star Wars. 1978, Animal House. 1979, The China Syndrome. 1984, This Is Spinal Tap. 1984, Terminator. 1993, Philadelphia. 1998, Saving Private Ryan. And the last one, 2018, Green Book. From the editorial page, Trump's ultimatum, target list in Iran. An escalation shouldn't punish the people more than the regime. President Trump hailed the rescue of the 2 U.S. airmen at a news conference on Monday, and he deserves his share of credit. God knows he'd have been blamed had the high-risk mission failed. Involving more than 150 aircraft, this was one of the largest, most complex, most harrowing combat searches ever attempted, Mr. Trump said. It'll go down in the books. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, put it well. The nation needs to know this, he said. This was an incredibly brave and courageous mission and a testament to the courage, skill, and tenacity of the joint force and our leaders, especially a daylight option. Having the guts to try means so much to so many. Americans in uniform saw the nation's commitment. Adversaries saw how a U.S. joint force was able to pull this off rapidly, a mere 30 miles from a major Iranian city. CIA Director John Radcliffe said U.S. intelligence showed the Iranian regime was embarrassed, but not embarrassed enough to cease inflicting damage on their own country, alas. On Monday, state media said Iran had rejected a temporary ceasefire in exchange for reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Controlling the strait is Iran's only defense at this point, since 2 shoot-downs out of 13,000 U.S. combat sorties does not an air defense make. The regime countered by demanding a permanent ceasefire and full sanctions relief, but without the nuclear and other concessions to make it worth the ink. This directs all eyes to Mr. Trump's Tuesday night deadline for Iran to reopen Hormuz. He could always delay it again, but at his news conference, he laid out what he'd need to see. "We have to have a deal that's acceptable to me," Mr. Trump said. "And part of the deal's going to be we want free traffic of oil and everything else. If not, we have a plan," the president said, "where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business. We will soon find out who's calling whose bluff. But don't expect Iran's regime to care much about what strikes like those would do to its people." Taken literally, Mr. Trump is proposing to hit many targets that would harm Iranian civilians, which could spark a refugee crisis. Striking indiscriminately at critical infrastructure would be wrong, as well as unwise. Punishing the Iranian people we need on our side. They would be willing to suffer that in order to have freedom, Mr. Trump said. Regime mismanagement has already left Iran's grid in a permanent state of crisis, but such an attack could give Iranians all the suffering with none of the freedom. It could also erode support for the war at home and abroad. The obvious solution is to discriminate between types of infrastructure. Bridges can be legitimate targets, but it depends if they have any military use of note. Otherwise, why punish the people? Energy sources can also be legitimate targets if they have a particularly notable military nexus, such as providing fuel for missile launchers. But not every energy target will meet that standard, and the military benefit doesn't justify plunging 90 million people into darkness. One yardstick by which to judge any U.S. escalation is this: in addition to increasing pressure, which may never be enough to sway Iran's regime, will it help prepare an operation to reopen Hormuz? The U.S. has a strong interest in causing chaos for Iran's military, and targeting can allow it to do so without bombing every power plant in the country. From the opinion pages, voters still want normalcy. Biden and Trump both failed to deliver it. Will Democrats do any better in 2026? There's a strange dynamic at work in American politics. In volatile times, the message of the last two presidential elections seems to be that voters are yearning for someone to restore a measure of normality to national life. Partisans on both sides always think the moment is ripe for radicalism, but voters in the middle seem to want normal. They want leaders who will keep the country safe, protect its borders, manage the economy evenly, avoid dangerous and unnecessary messes abroad, and demonstrate that they understand things like the difference between a man and a woman. Is that so hard? Apparently, it is. Americans keep voting for normal and getting something else. Joe Biden won in 2020 because after a turbulent year in which the nation seemed to be having a collective nervous breakdown amid a real national emergency, COVID, and a manufactured one, Black Lives Matter, voters wanted reassuring, dull ordinariness. Americans thought the unthreatening old man who had done essentially nothing in a 50-year political career might at least not do stupid stuff, to paraphrase his Democratic predecessor. Instead, they got a president out of a radical Hollywood screenwriter's fever dream. Open borders, fiscal profligacy, an inflationary surge, a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and endless lectures on how there was no such thing as woman or men. All that in a man whose cognitive faculties were far from normal. No, 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 Americans said again in 2024. That's not what we wanted. This time, Donald Trump was the more normal one. He would secure our borders, get prices under control, avoid unnecessary foreign entanglements, and assert common sense ideas about sex. So far, it's worked out well on immigration and sex, although neither the method of implementation nor the president's effect has been normal. But how are inflation and foreign entanglements working out for you? No surprise then that Mr. Trump's approval rating is almost exactly where President Biden's was. You would think there's a lesson here for Democrats. The party seems set for big gains in the midterm elections, a result that would set them up well for the next presidential cycle. But have they learned the lesson? Are they ready to be normal? The signs aren't encouraging. It's hard to read too much into the party's performance in elections over the last year. They have won pretty much everywhere with a wide range of candidates in special elections and regular elections, in deep red territory and in more contested geographies, running candidates of the far left and the center left. Hardcore left-wing Democrats like self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist Zoran Mandani in the New York mayoral race and Ana Lilia Mejia in a New Jersey district primary have triumphed. Candidates with a broader appeal have prevailed in purple or purplish states, such as the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey. So have heterodox types like James Tallarico, the Bible-quoting left-wing populist who won the U.S. Senate nomination from Texas. These offer few clues as to which of the party's wings is in the ascendant, but there is some clearer evidence from polling data, and it's not encouraging for those who think a dose of normal is on the way. A new comprehensive survey this week by the research group Foco Data digs deep into the attitudes of thousands of voters likely to take part in the Democratic primaries. Headline figures for favored candidates in the 2028 presidential primary can probably be discounted on grounds that they are largely reflect name recognition of the party's familiar leading figures. Kamala Harris leads, followed by fellow Californian Governor Gavin Newsom. But the more detailed survey data indicate that the party's core voters have moved leftward and kept going. Asked if they think their party's main problem is that they have moved too far left on social and cultural issues, or that they haven't been bold enough, 60% say the problem is insufficient boldness. On whether the party should soften its positions to win back voters it has lost, only 17% say yes. 29% want bolder policies. 15% favor a fundamentally new approach. There is a clue as to what that fundamentally new approach might be. By 57% to 13%, Democratic voters say they approve of democratic socialism with private enterprise alongside strong public services and worker protection as their preferred economic system. There are predictably radical views on other topics. 43% say they want the U.S. to reduce its commitment and support for Israel, while only 22% want to increase it. By large majorities, Democrats say they favor packing courts and abolishing the Senate filibuster. We live in an age of radical politics, increasing polarization, and a steady centrifugal momentum in both central major parties. However, much independent-minded voters may want normalcy from their leaders. Republicans and Democrats seem set on their own paths, each driven by a base that is ill at ease with the old centripetal ways. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Pope Leo XIV goes to war. The pontiff wrongly suggests that pacifism is the sole acceptable moral position, by William McGurn. At the Easter Sunday celebration in Vatican's St. Peter's Square, Pope Leo XIV delivered a bracing message about the war in Iran. Let those who have the power to unleash wars choose peace, he said. Not a peace imposed by force, but through dialogue. Not with the desire to dominate others, but to encounter them. We are growing accustomed to violence, resigning ourselves to it, and becoming indifferent to the deaths of thousands of people. Pope Leo didn't name names. He didn't have to. This was a shot at Donald Trump. In the abstract, the Pope's words might apply to any number of leaders, including Ayatollah Mojtaba Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran. But the press are taking this as a shot against President Trump, and that is how it was meant. It's a solemn development anytime America goes to war. For the enemy, war means destruction, the deaths of soldiers, and possibly the tragic, unintended killing of innocents. So too for the U.S. The toll of this war is so far tiny compared with other wars, but the conflict has already claimed the lives of more than a dozen Americans. Less obvious from the headlines, war causes soul-searching among our troops. The American in uniform must ask himself, am I doing the right thing? Am I prosecuting the war honorably? When my test comes, will I do right by my fellow soldiers and the rules of war? The Catholic Church has spoken on all these issues at least since St. Augustine. It's called the just war tradition, and although it doesn't spit out neat yes or no answers, it does point to the right questions. Unfortunately, the public impression created over the past several decades is that pacifism is the only true Christian response to military conflict, and Pope Leo isn't the only leader to encourage this view. A few years back, in remarks that touched on the war in Ukraine, Pope Francis declared, "There is no such thing as a just war." Though he didn't go nearly as far, in early 2003, Pope St. John Paul II made clear he thought the U.S. war in Iraq was wrong. The muddle of Catholic teaching on war has been a long time in the making. Few churchmen will explicitly promote pacifism as the only proper Christian option, but that is the effect. And the best answer to such pacifism is clarity. Christianity isn't a pacifist religion, says the Reverend Gerald Murray, a Catholic priest and commentator on EWTN. Churchmen need to affirm that the legitimate use of force is virtuous. Protecting the innocent isn't simply the ideal we hope to attain, it is a clear duty. If negotiation is the only way to solve conflicts, Pope Leo should send home the Swiss Guard and train negotiators to meet with anyone who shows up at Vatican City with a gun or a bomb. Right now, everyone is treated as a suspect by having to pass through metal detectors to get into St. Peter's. In addition, pacifism is always an individual option, not a communal response. To put it another way, I have the right to turn my cheek. I don't have the right to turn my neighbor's cheek. It's up to the actors, in this case, President Trump, and the leadership in Iran, to judge the necessity for action and the moral content of their own decisions. Militants may not get the last word, but they do get the first. They have more knowledge of the actual conditions, and they bear responsibility for what happens. On the war in Iran, Pope Leo has made statements that receive applause but aren't true. When he asserts that negotiation is the only way to resolve conflict, he forgets that as often as not, military action is necessary to bring combatants to the negotiating table. Last month, in an address to the Italian military ordinariate, Pope Leo stated that we ought to respect what military people do as a vocation. The soldier's identity, he said, is forged by generosity, a spirit of service, lofty aspirations, and profound sentiments. Beautiful words, alas. The Church too often seems to withdraw such respect as soon as the soldier has to fight. War is always a failure of diplomacy, a failure to reconcile, and invariably carries abominable human cost. But when churchmen can't bring themselves to take seriously even the possibility of a just war, they become functionally pacifist. That is both a terrible abdication of responsibility and a false application of principle that serves only the interest of the wicked. NATO allies are quietly helping the U.S. in Iran. Spain is the exception, but the UK, Italy, Germany, Portugal, and even France are doing their parts. By Linus Kojala and Vitalis Leskavicius. President Trump has turned the North Atlantic Treaty Organization into a political target of his Iran war messaging. NATO has done absolutely nothing, he said, after earlier calling Allied reluctance to help a very stupid mistake and warning that we don't have to be there for NATO. Secretary of State Marco Rubio echoed the line, saying Washington would have to re-examine all of this after the operation ends. That line may prove politically effective, but it doesn't reflect the full picture. Even as many European leaders keep their political distance from the war and continue to press for de-escalation, they are helping to enable the U.S. effort. They have provided the essential operating platform for American power in the Middle East. Look at the map of operations. London, after some delay, authorized the use of British bases for U.S. strikes on Iranian missile sites targeting shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Portugal reaffirmed its decision to allow the U.S. to use Lajes Air Base in the Azores. Germany has kept Ramstein Air Base available under standing agreements, a vital U.S. hub for logistics, force projection, and drone-linked operations between Europe, even as Berlin insists this isn't NATO's war. Italy still allows U.S. base access and overflights, although it says any Iran-related offensive use must be cleared by Rome first. Even France has allowed U.S. aircraft presence on French bases for missions supporting Gulf partners, while barring those planes from taking part in strikes on Iran. Spain was the clear exception. The leftist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez seemed eager to pick a fight with Mr. Trump. Last year, Madrid alone refused to commit to NATO's 5% defense spending target. Now it has denied the use of Naval Station Rota and Moran Air Base for Iran-related operations and closed its airspace to U.S. military flights linked to the war. Yet, when Spain blocked some routes and facilities, flights were simply rerouted elsewhere in Europe, including through Germany. The effect of Allied support isn't merely symbolic. Access, basing rights, overflight permissions, maintenance, refueling, and logistics are the skeleton of military power. Without them, American operations would become slower, costlier, and riskier. No one has made that point more clearly than U.S. Air Force General Alexis Grinkowicz, NATO's top commander in Europe. In a March statement to the Senate, he wrote that the continent's geography and posture allow the U.S. European Command to support other combatant commands with critical logistics, ready forces, and lethal capabilities, and that U.S. power projection depends on European allies. In the hearing itself, he also said the vast majority of European allies had been extremely supportive. That is the paradox at the heart of the current transatlantic debate. Politically, the war with Iran has widened the gap between Washington and many European governments. Operationally, it has underscored how heavily the U.S. still relies on Europe and how cooperative most European governments are. That is why allies should resist tit-for-tat rhetoric and focus on examples of working together. This is the backdrop to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte's trip to Washington this week. The core message should be simple. Europe isn't only a consumer of U.S. security, it is part of the machinery of American power projection, hosting roughly 80,000 U.S. troops and some 40 bases that both deter enemies and support operations far beyond the continent. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 7th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal, which we read every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings